Individuals may participate in this meeting via the DOE YouTube channel publicized on the agenda. These meetings are public meetings to provide transparency and the opportunity for the public to engage in the process. In order to enable every participant to have voice, public comment will be accepted via email at reopeningIdeas@doe.k12.de.us or via voicemail at 302-735-4244. All comments and ideas will be forwarded to the respective work groups for review and posted on DOE's website as well. Each week, public comment is compiled from the previous week and posted online. A copy is also provided to the work group chairs to then share overall themes related to the responses that may impact the work at hand. We encourage working group members to review these comments online before each meeting. To summarize public comment this week, the public comment included many parents with varying concerns. While some parents feel their students should return to school, there are also many parents who do not yet feel confident in the safe return. We received feedback on a few topics that we will be discussing tonight: busing and transportation, as well as medically vulnerable students and staff. We want to thank all the parents and educational stakeholders for their continued involvement and feedback. Next slide, Patches. So here's tonight's agenda. In an effort to maximize the committee's time and ensure we finish scenario 2 and 3 in the allotted time, we'll once again do a quick roll call and are welcome to memorialize which committee members are present this evening. Next, we'll provide a recap of the assignment. And in tonight's discussion, we will finish the last 2 protocols in scenario 2, and then we'll dive into scenario 3, where we will talk about substantial spread. We will close the evening with a recap of next week's assignment. Next slide. So again, my name is Mike Rodriguez. I'm co-chairing this committee along with Dr. Megan Wall, with the assistance from the Opportunity Lab partner, Dr. Mario Ramirez. We would all like to welcome the committee to our 4th Health and Wellness meeting. We will now take roll call of the members in attendance. When your name is called, please respond with here or present.
Thank you.
No, Jackie.
Yes, Mike, I got on. Good evening. Kevin Fitzgerald.
Present.
Thank you. Loretha Ojumuso.
Present.
Susan Haberstroh.
Present.
Stacy Greenlee. Dana Carr. Sue
Present.
Smith. Thank you, Dana.
Present. Sue Smith, present.
Thank you. Emma Brower.
Present.
Daphne Conwright.
Present.
Maricel Santiago. Provi Powell.
Here.
Valerie Longhurst. Michael Smith.
Present.
Anthony Del Collo. Laura Sturgeon. And Dwyer.
Present.
And Mario Ramirez, I know you're there. Just going back, Stacy Greenlee, are you here? No, Stacy.
I'm here.
Oh, you are. Sorry. Anthony Del Collo? No. Laura Sturgeon? No. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jackie.
You're welcome.
So as a reminder, public comment is welcome. You can submit public comment via email at reopeningIdeas@doe.k12.de.us or via voicemail at 302-735-4244. All public comment will be posted on DDOE's reopening page. And for the public, all meeting materials are located on the public meeting site, and the link is there for your convenience. Next slide. Megan?
So as sorry, I was muted. As an assignment recap, just again for folks who are tuning in, we had our first meeting with pandemic backgrounds, and in the past 3 weeks then have discussed both our minimal spread and our minimal to moderate spread. As Mike mentioned, we are going to do just the last couple of pieces of that scenario 2 tonight, sorry, and then we'll move on to scenario 3, which is our substantial spread. And next week is our last meeting. So while this says recommendations to the secretary, we also do have time next week to review and go over the document and to make sure that we have all comments in. Next slide.
Thanks, Megan. So to reiterate what Megan said, tonight we'll be reviewing the last scenario before our committee makes the final recommendations to Secretary Bunting. Please remember to use the raise hand feature if you wish to participate and to lower the hand after you speak. As a reminder, the following norms will help ensure we stay focused and have a thorough discussion of scenario 3. So just a quick review of the norms. Everyone has a voice. Respect all the opinions around the table. Please stay focused on our goal through the lens of health and wellness. Be succinct, and compromises may be necessary. Next slide. So again, this takes us to scenario 2, minimal to moderate spread, the last 2 protocols. Next slide. So where we left off last week was the busing and transportation in scenario 2. Some of the comments that were made were that the buses operating at half their capacity would be a hardship. Also heard a little bit about hybrid scheduling. And in this week's public comment, having all the bus windows open during student transport was identified as a concern for some parents. So now that we've had a little time to reflect on this protocol, changes, additions, or tweaks would the committee like to make or to discuss?
I know there were a few comments at the end of last session, so if you didn't send them in, you can let us know, and I will be able to see if you raise your hand. Larissa, go ahead.
Hi, this is just a brief comment. I noticed just in the draft that the bullet around facial coverings being worn by students isn't included. So just making sure that the language matches the draft as well as what's on the slide.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Daphne, go ahead.
Thank you. I know I commented last time that there was a public comment about cleaning the buses. We had protocols available for cleaning the schools. So I think people were wondering about what is the protocol for cleaning the buses. Is that on the same level as the school building?
So I think that protocol would be found in the operations committee as far as what the cleaning of the buses would be. Let me see. Yes. Or did we discuss it in our cleaning slide?
Michael, this is Mario. I would just say, Daphne, that the same standards that are used in the schools would be used on the buses between transport rides.
Thank you, Mario.
Stacy, you're next.
I just want to make sure everybody considers busing is a hardship a lot of times for districts, financially, as well as just the practicality of kids coming from all over the place. A lot of districts double up the busing. In other words, they might take all the elementary school children to school and then turn around and pick up the middle school or the high school kids. So you have to take that into consideration when you think about cleaning between rides. And then also, if we're looking at any kind of alternating schedule, I think it would take some time to figure out how to you're going to have to combine reducing the number of kids in school with the bus rides that make the most sense in order to have half, because we have buses that might be at full capacity and then buses that are like half filled in any given ride. So I think it would just take some time to work through those sorts of things with the districts before they can work all that out.
Thank you, Stacy.
Sue Smith, go ahead.
Just wanted to just say a little bit about our special needs buses. and the wheelchairs and the car seats and those things like that on there, that this could be kind of a concern for spacing on those. And the other thing is maybe we should encourage parents that can drop off their children to drop them off. But then on the other hand, then schools would need to look at protocol of how we're going to handle the increased number of parents dropping off children and that timing and those kinds of things.
Those are great ideas. I think in reviewing all the protocols for all the committee's work, those were areas that were being addressed by the operations team.
Dr. Fitzgerald, you're next.
Thank you. I was going to echo what Sue said with regard to the special needs children and those children in a wheelchair. Sometimes when you say buses should operate at half their normal capacity, that would be confusing when transporting those children. Also, I think as was brought up at our last meeting, we need to emphasize the fact that perhaps siblings could share a seat or children in the same family. And that also would change the language from one person per seat and only half the normal capacity. And I want to make sure people understand that those options still exist as we schedule transportation for the school's opening.
Thank you, Dr. Fitzgerald.
Representative Smith, do you still have something to say, or is your hand back down?
You guys covered it by saying that I guess options for both language that either encourages parents to drop off by vehicle or whatever, because the number of complaints I as a representative get on buses being late or not coming into neighborhoods and everything else, I just don't see how you'd be able to do it with the cleaning standards if we don't have more drop off via parents. So.
Thank you, Representative Smith.
I don't see any other hands up. Anyone else? I'll just give you all a second. Okay, I think we can move on to our next slide. So this next one is the only one we did not get to in protocols last time, and I suspect folks will have some recommendations around this. This is about our medically vulnerable students and teachers. So as you can see, it says the high-risk groups include but are not limited to those below. And again, these are both kiddos and adults in the building. And if you want to go to that next slide, Patches, just so people can see what the actual protocol looks like. Great. So, take a second to look at this one and then let us know if there are comments or questions. I know this is one of the topics that came up last time. Daphne, you're first. Go ahead.
Thank you. On the previous slide, we need to add to that list of vulnerable population students with disabilities. I know we talked about that last meeting in another location, but we need to add that to that list. And then there have been a good deal of public comments, including from the Governor's Advisory Council for Exceptional Citizens, about some special considerations for students with all kinds of different special needs. So I would just advise that we look at some of those and make sure that we have responses to some of those concerns. In terms of everybody getting what they need, everybody getting equal doesn't always work, right? Everybody needs to have their needs addressed. So persons with disabilities may have some different needs than their other populations. We need to make sure that we have the tools in there to support them and their teachers and staff.
Thanks, that's a great point. We can certainly go back and read those public comments. To echo you, I talked to we have a group at Nemours who has a parent group with these medically vulnerable students, and I think their main concern is just making sure of exactly what you said, which is the equity piece. So making sure that those kids have what they need to learn, including virtual options that might be differing for different kids. So certainly we can go back and read those specifically, but I hear you on that point. Larissa, you are up next.
Yes, I just thinking about it from the school leader in, I could see there being some confusion between bullet 3 and bullet 5 with the ultimate individual decisions to attend school. And I wonder if that creates confusion on the parent end as well. So I don't necessarily have a suggestion on how to navigate that, but I do think that we need to provide more clarity for folks who will be making that decision alongside their teachers, and how teachers might be or staff members might be self-identifying as high risk, and how that conversation is navigated and those decisions are ultimately made. So just a question around bullet 5 and maybe providing a little bit more clarity there.
Thank you. I'll note that down. Stacy, you're next. Go ahead.
Thank you. I think just being clear, we submit to DOE excuse notes for kids who have been out for any sort of medical reason. I think in the language, if we're talking about families being able to make that decision to keep their kids home, we need some sort of medical documentation and support. And then we need to change the language as far as truancy so that we're that if they're not in the building, we're not looking at the number of days missed contributing to any kind of truancy situation.
Thank you, Stacy.
Great points. Any other thoughts that folks have around this particular situation? Again, I think the biggest feedback that I heard when I read public comments and listened to some of the parents of these medically complex kids are sort of covered by that first bullet, which is making sure that they have access to learning. Daphne, is your hand back up or still up from before?
Yeah, I had another comment. I don't think that the first bullet covers the concerns of most of the parents that I've talked to. That's probably, in fact, what the education would look like and instruction would look like is one of their biggest concerns, along with just their child being safe if they are in the building. I'm looking at some of the comments that I've received from others, like who will put masks on students with disabilities who cannot do it for themselves? How will outbursts and meltdowns and behaviors related to these things be handled and by whom? So it kind of reminds me of the discussion around the mental health needs, that we may need more staff behavioral support for students, and we need to make sure that that's available to address the additional concerns and requirements that will be taking place. And all of the changes and differences for students with disabilities and the staff that support them.
That's a really great point. I will certainly add that in about increasing our behavioral staff and supports, because you're right, those are things that are not covered here. I don't see any other hands. I'll give folks a second just in case anyone has anything else. Dr. Fitzgerald, go ahead.
Thank you. Just to be clear, as we're discussing the various scenarios, this reading about medically vulnerable students and teachers pretty much recommends that school districts now run a hybrid model in some way, shape, or form. When we consider all of the other scenarios, what I take away from reading these bullet points is that we would be obligated to run a hybrid model, even in scenario 1, where everybody would be eligible to return based on the last bullet point about ultimate decisions to attend school in person. I may be obligated, other school districts may be obligated to, in fact, run some sort of hybrid model. Is that correct? Or am I just jumping to a conclusion that isn't there?
I think that's a good question, and I am reading it the same way. Mario, I will reflect back to you just for a second to see if that's the intention. And it feels like, to your point, Dr. Fitzgerald, it feels like this is what we're asking for, right? Making sure we have some alternative options. But I just want to clarify if that's the way it was written here.
Yeah, it's a good question, Dr. Fitzgerald. I mean, I think it reflects the unknown with this disease, right? I mean, I think at this juncture, it's hard to require any school to offer dual, a virtual option if they don't have it. But I think Right, every parent would have to decide whether they feel like going to school is the right decision for their child. And if they don't, I don't know that that means you have to offer a hybrid as much as you have to be able to provide schooling at home. I leave the logistics of how that actually runs to the education folks, but I'm not sure that it obligates you to do virtual if that was the question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just, I'm looking at it, and I'm also looking at where it leaves me as far as staff is concerned. And I know there are so many different variables, but as we try to put together our own plans as districts, we do, I mean, based on what the recommendations are going to be, we have to take a hard look and say, okay, if we have to provide this, how will we provide it, and what is the best way to do that? And I just want to make sure when I report out that basically this is a key component that everyone has to pay attention to and has to be prepared to offer education both at home and in because this is far different from any homebound instruction that we've had to offer in the past.
Yeah, I will say, Dr. Fitzgerald, just as an extra point, among all the states that we're working with and the other plans that that we've seen, I think this is the area where people are the most uncertain, but I think everybody is at least recognizing on some level that some sort of virtual option is going to have to be necessary because folks just don't know what's going to happen in the fall.
Thank you. I certainly understand.
Thanks, Mario. Reverend Powell, go ahead.
Roles. The reassignment or allocation of teachers is probably going to cause, I guess, some staffing issues, I imagine, within the schools, the districts. I imagine the schools should be concerned about that initially with identifying, I guess, teachers that are over age of 65 or having some underlying conditions. Is that I guess, the sentiment of that bullet point?
I think so. Mario, you would agree with that?
Yes.
So then if they are reallocated to administrative roles away from students, then is that going to create some additional teacher shortage, lack of continuity with teachers and students? I'm just sure that there's going to be some type of complex organizational challenge with doing that.
Yeah, I'll refer that back to Michael. I don't know about that myself.
Reverend, I would imagine so, and I'm sure that's a topic that was discussed in the operations group. Staffing, things that they need to be looking at to ensure that they have their appropriate staff in classrooms, their appropriate supports where they need them. Again, I'm positive that was addressed in the operations committee. But yes, those are great points. Those are all going to be issues depending on the spread and the community spread in certain areas.
Thanks, Mike. Stacy, you're next.
Sorry to jump in again. I just wanted to have some, I wanted to talk about some school anxiety kids. I want to differentiate the COVID anxiety from the school anxiety, because my concern is when students go to get, documentation to support them, maybe not being in the building. I want doctors to really be aware of the school anxiety issue. Over my 20 plus years in counseling, I've seen an increase in the amount of students who are asking for a medical note to be home because of a school anxiety. But home is where they want to be, and it's the comfort zone, and it's really hard to get them integrated back into the school. So I would hate to see doctors write a note for that without some sort of plan of reintegration. And being just aware that that's an issue that they're dealing with, not just a COVID kind of anxiety, an anxiety about the illness, but an actual anxiety of school and not wanting to be there in general.
Thanks, Stacey. As a psychologist, I will second that. I'm always trying to get kids reintegrated in schools. I will certainly note that down. I think that's a really, really good point. Dr. Santiago, you're up next.
Trying. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Yep, go ahead.
Okay, hello to everybody. Just going back to the teachers, I'm just going to throw in an idea about the teachers that are a high risk over any underlying condition or over 65. What if we have to use them? Can we use them as the for the hybrid, like the ones that teaching at home? The ones that we're thinking of putting in administration, wouldn't that be an option?
As a former principal, I would definitely be considering that. And I'm assuming that all the educational leaders would be looking at all their staffing and determining how they could use the current staff that possibly couldn't teach due to having being medically vulnerable, and redeploying them in other areas to support students and staff.
Thank you.
Okay, I do not see any more hands, so I think, no other hands, so I think we can, Patches, go to that next slide. And I think I'm going to hand it over to Mario to talk about scenario 3 Sprite. You can probably go to the next slide again. There you go. Mario, I'll hand it over to you.
This is essentially the situation that we were in, back in early March when disease is spreading really prolifically in the local area. And so it essentially means that the reproductive number is quite a bit greater than 1, and that Delaware has had to backtrack to like an essentially closed roadmap phase. And so as a result, schools would be closed to in-person instruction as well.
We can go to the next slide, I think.
And actually, Megan, I'm sorry, if I could add just one other point.
Sure, absolutely.
There was a question that's come up in past weeks about how other countries around the world are doing and sort of what has happened as they've reopened schools. And I just wanted to point out for groups this week that Germany had to reclose some of the schools in one of their region when their R basically jumped up pretty high and they had an outbreak in sort of around a meat packing plant there. And so I think that is a little bit of how scenario 2 plays out. But my expectation is that if that were to continue, that would be sort of what a transition to scenario 3 would look like here.
Next slide.
Okay, so we did have a little bit, just to give folks a background of discussion around last time in scenario 3, one of the questions that was asked was, are these additive? And in scenario 1 and 2, the answer was yes. But I think that as we think about scenario 3, especially given that this is, as you'll see, mostly schools shut down, that these are sort of the recommended pieces for mental health here and physical health. And there's less of the more intense screening in some of those points. So interested in folks' thoughts on this. Again, you can read what's on the slide, but again, this is a little bit different and separate from the other pieces. Kristen, go ahead.
One's a question, one's a comment. My question is, if in scenario 3, is it by region when spread is when it's widespread. So would we, in other words, would we have an instance where one district closes but another district stays open? Or if one closes, do they all close?
Mario, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding was it is DPH's calculation of statewide spread.
Yeah, Megan, that's the figure for the R. I actually don't know though whether they're planning to institute kind of regional closures or whether there would be a statewide closure in Delaware. Michael, do you know?
I don't. My assumption of scenario 3 would have been full state closure, but that's a great question.
Okay. Thank you. If you could, maybe clear that up just so we have a better understanding of that, that would be helpful. My comment would be, again, just providing districts with consistency around the guidelines to address student mental health. What we've heard a lot of is how it's handled is obviously different within each district. Oftentimes, some of our specialists feel their hands are tied when it comes to ethically providing counseling to their students because, for instance, they have to have another person on the call with them, either a para or another adult, or that child is obviously going through things at home because the home life is very stressful, and they may be experiencing some abuse at home, but cannot say it. They're on the Zoom call or whatever it may be with the counselor or the school psychologist. So, just some consistent guidelines on how districts should handle that. Like I said, every district is different in how they want to communicate to kids and who they want on the Zoom call and who they don't want on the Zoom call. So it's just, from a remote, it's difficult when you're dealing in a remote environment, dealing with their mental health, I imagine.
For sure. Thank you. Larissa, you are up next.
Thank you. Yeah, just a suggestion regarding the overall structure when we're rolling this out to schools and school leaders. I would imagine that scenario 1 and scenario 2 being additive, but then scenario 3 not quite being additive could be a bit confusing and some information could get lost from one to the next. I did see another plan that kind of had a chart structure for each category. So that might be something to consider when we're rolling this out, just so that it's very clear for school leaders and for district leaders what needs to happen within each scenario.
That's a great point. Okay, Reverend Powell, you're up next.
Yeah, the first bullet when you say leverage Delaware State Department of Education resource for students and staff mental health, we are suggesting in this leveraging opportunity a virtual assessment for social emotional learning or mental wellness for children, students, and teachers. When we talk about leverage, does that mean that the department would provide a standardized minimum standard of assessment or support for all districts to acquiesce to?
So Reverend Powell, that's an excellent question. Susan Haberstroh, can you, I know we discussed this a little bit today in our check-in. Can you just provide just a brief update on some of the things that we're thinking around the screening and the tools?
Sure, this is Susan Haberstroh. So what we had hoped to do, especially and with DPH, is just to provide some resources for student and staff mental health and wellness, whether that's a toolkit to identify how to use universal screening. So when we're talking about leverage, I think it's just providing the opportunity to use the resources. Of course, we wouldn't mandate that any district or school have to use certain materials. So that's the way I'm reading that. But as what we're planning to do are to build some toolkits and some ideas for districts, because they're all in different contexts, they're all in different places.
Thank you. In my research, I saw where they strongly suggest that the state do provide that means of assessment and that it be virtual. And so that, you know, there at least be a minimum standard. So that's good to hear that we're working in that direction.
Thank you, Reverend Powell. And thank you, Susan.
Thanks, Reverend Powell. Yeah, thank you to both of you. Sue Smith, you can go ahead next.
Thank you. When I look at when we go from mid to mod to complete closure, and this may be in part of operations too when I listen to that, but the message, you know, just needs to be so consistent across the statewide of how it's recommended that each district close if they have a case in a school building or if they have families that have it, you know, those kinds of things in closure. But the consistency is what I keep getting, because we have so many families that relocate all year long and they go to one district and then they come to another one and the message may be different. And I think during this time especially, it's so important that we're all kind of consistent in a plan, so that if the district near me closes and families want to know why they closed, you know, that families understand that there's a reason, that if they had a case over there, that's why they closed. But if the numbers go up in the state, we will all close. And also maybe in operations is the message of that if it's statewide, if the numbers go to this, we're going to close. And as districts, are we prepared to send those kids home to be ready to go virtual? You know, should we start out the school year with what Wi-Fi's are available in our systems? I know in like some of our districts, they extended Wi-Fi platforms, and maybe a lot of people don't know that. But maybe, you know, if we do go back into the building, to have that prep already so that families are aware of what's available, so that if on Friday, like we did before, we're not coming back, they know that there's a plan in place of just for that consistency to, you know, that all our families are kind of getting the same message and in multiple languages.
Great suggestion, Sue.
Thanks so much. Dana, go ahead.
Hi, sorry, it takes a long time for me to get off of mute for some reason. I just wanted to go back to the question about delivery of mental health services that Kristen raised earlier. Throughout the spring, the school-based wellness centers have been doing a lot of behavioral health counseling using telehealth. So we will have some great lessons learned from that. Several of them are doing remote and over using telehealth tools to do registration into the school-based wellness centers at the high school level. So we're really trying to expand access to the mental health services, particularly through the school-based wellness centers. So there's been a lot of great stuff happening, and we've really been able to open up those lines of communication. Some of them are still providing services for the summer too, just to throw that out there. So just wanted to let folks know that that has been happening. And so we can provide, I'll work with Susan and she and I can pull some stuff together to highlight some of the great examples of what's been happening, where the resources are across the state.
Thanks, Dana. That's really helpful. I think I also am glad that you mentioned the telehealth piece, because I think another thing we have to address, which I know is being addressed at the state, is some of these telehealth waivers. But a good point is that the school wellness centers are also using telehealth. So to make sure that we can continue to be able to do that, that's a great point. I don't see any other hands up here. So we're going to move on to the next protocol. And if folks have thoughts, we can come back to this. But we're going to go to the next slide, Patches.
Thanks, Megan. So scenario 3 protocols, they're on 3 separate slides. Remember that in scenario 3, there's a substantial spread and the schools are closed. So if we could review the first 3 protocols and see what tweaks, concerns, or questions there may be, and then we'll move on to the other 2 slides. The first one's spacing and movement, screening students, and dining, gathering, and extracurricular activities. Figured our heavy lift was in scenario 1 and 2, simply because the students aren't in place or in school. So some of these will be a little bit easier for us to address. I'm not sure if there are any hands up. If there aren't, maybe we can move on to the second slide.
Reverend Powell's hands up now.
Great.
I'm sorry, I must have left it up from the last comment.
You just wanted to make things interesting, right? We were slowing down around here. Daphne, you're next.
Yes, my hand is up. Thank you. I just think someone mentioned this earlier, that would be a good opportunity while things are closed to prepare for moving back to scenario 2. So I think it might be appropriate to put in these particular protocols, during this time, prepare to gather materials needed for spacing and movement in scenario 2, prepare to gather signs, prepare to gather whatever it is we need to go back in some manner in scenario 2 to prepare for that as part of scenario 3 protocols. We talked about the PPE, and that may take some time to get if there's another rise in cases. So hopefully we have some lessons learned from the last 3 months, and we should take a look at those things and see, it would have been nice during these 3 months if we had done A, B, and C and kind of build that into this protocol for in the future.
Thank you, Daphne. We'll definitely take note of that.
I don't see any other hands at this time. If you want to go to that next slide, Mike.
So the next slide contains the next 4 protocols, which are athletics, PPE and hygiene, cleaning, and busing and student transportation.
I don't see any hands up for this one.
Okay. So why don't we move on to the last slide, the medically vulnerable students and teachers. The 2 bullets here really look like they belong on the academic committee to review.
Daphne's hand is now up.
Thank you. I think this is where many of our parents have the most concerns, and maybe, like you said, the academic committee is addressing what virtual instruction should look like. I would caution against the wording in bullet number 2, enact abbreviated teaching schedules. Some of our our students receiving special services don't need abbreviated teaching schedules during virtual learning. They need maybe different or sometimes more. We really need to take a look at what that should include. So this is a case where, to me, we have to be really cognizant of one size doesn't fit all, especially in the switch to all virtual learning. So to really take a look at that wording, even if it goes to another committee, I would want to really have a group dive into the wording that we use there. Also, the first bullet to provide some more recommendations around virtual platforms and what does that look like, and hopefully, as I shared in another meeting, have included in the protocol that staff can receive training and some options for virtual instruction, especially around students with disabilities and their unique needs, and how can we meet those needs as best as possible during virtual education.
All great suggestions. I'll be sure to pass that along, and I'm sure Mario will help pass it along also.
Dr. Fitzgerald, go ahead.
Thank you. I would agree with Daphne. I think that the second bullet is too prescriptive for this group. I think that school districts, in dealing with setting up the curriculum and the schedules, follow the negotiated agreements, and also look to see what's in the best interest of meeting the needs of the children and working with the teachers. I don't think that this bullet is in the purview of this particular committee.
So
I
I'll be
don't
sure
see
to
other
pass
hands. Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
All right, go ahead. You're okay.
I was just going to say, as you all kind of thought for the last few minutes as we click through these, are there any other comments just in this scenario 3 protocol that didn't come up before? Reverend Powell's hand is back up. Go ahead.
I would think that if we went to this, I would think extreme scenario where we visited before, I would think even more so, and someone might have mentioned it, that the parents are going to need significant support. And I don't know if it's an assumption that if the schools are closed, that maybe some of your community centers and other areas that are supportive of parents and students could perhaps be leveraged to support parents and training, both. And I would think that not only the students and parents need to be assessed and brought up to speed with social emotional learning and support and how that impacts the students, but I think community leaders also. I think we might under leverage those who represent the whole total child. So I don't know if that fits in this protocol, but I'm just saying that in this extreme scenario, we need to support the families, the parents, and even the community, gird them up with proper training so that we could support them even if it's not in the brick and mortar school.
Thank you. We have one more hand. Daphne, is your hand back up, I think?
Yes, thank you. I want to emphasize that this is, when I look at all the comments that I personally have received from parents and some of the public comments and from other groups that I'm a part of, this is the area of biggest concern for so many parents, especially parents of students with disabilities, that what does the instruction look like and what support is available to them. They feel like they're assuming the role of teacher at home during this time, and they have requested, in some cases received, some extra like behavioral supports, academic supports from the schools, how they can work with their kids at home as teacher, and as teachers, some behavioral concerns arise, and providing those behavioral supports as well to the parents directly. So just like the increased needs for mental health in some other scenarios, in this scenario, again, I agree with what the Reverend said, like we need to support the families. They are doing the brunt of the work, if you will, at home, and they've been feeling that for the last 3 months. It's really important to so many families. I really hope that the academic committee is taking a deep look at that. They're concerned about not only what their kids are learning, but all kinds of things. So this is a biggest area of concern for so many parents. I just want to really emphasize that.
Thanks, Daphne. Sue, go ahead.
I just share, as a member of the Health and Wellness Committee, I think that when we look at this school closure again, we can look at it with 2 scenarios. One scenario is if we go back to school and we get back on a routine and then we close again, it's going to increase the vulnerability of all of our students, not just the medically vulnerable students, but all of our students with their social emotional health, because kids are resilient, but they can only handle so much up and down in the school system. So I think we need to be proactive for all of our students to just make sure that we're making sure all of our parents have the help that they need and assistance and resources that they need. And when we speak about training of going virtual and all for our teachers, most of our teachers are currently working on that because we're all doing meetings all the time, learning. I learn more things all the time about it and how we can group meetings with classes and those kinds of things. So I think our state teachers are all very proactive and our nurses are proactive, everybody is proactive trying to accommodate families. But I think if we do go back, and even if we don't go back, we really need to emphasize on all of our families for make sure that everybody knows the resources for assistance and support and where to go and our telehealth and all of those kinds of things. So it's that huge message out to our families that we are here for you, for everyone.
Thank you, Daphne.
Thanks. I think that's super important. We have a couple more comments. Stacy, go ahead.
I just wondered if there was, I know there's been a lot of resources as far as food and things like that, but what if we're in a situation where the school closes, but the families are actually working and it's one thing for a high school student to be on their own at home and trying to navigate through education, but I really worry about, a kindergartner or a third grader home alone for not just the academic reasons, but other reasons. So I think there needs to be some sort of a plan where families can contact somebody and not be embarrassed or ashamed to do that, to say, I need to work and I need somewhere for my child to go if the daycares are closed as well.
Great
Really good point.
Kristen, you're up next.
Just a point. It says medically vulnerable students and teachers. Is there a possibility? Can we change teachers to educators? Because it's not just the teachers that would have to move their practice to a virtual platform.
Absolutely. I think you've mentioned that before, so that's something we need to go through generally in this protocol and make sure that we change that. So I wrote that down, but I think you're right, not just here, but other places too. Dr. Santiago, go ahead.
I was going to say the same thing because I had a question right now from a parent. What are they going to do if they have to work and the schools are closed? So we need to have a plan for that.
Thanks, guys. I think that's a really great point. And I think, from a hospital system standpoint, that's something we had to do all through COVID. So I think that's a great point, and we'll have to figure out how to navigate that resource so that there is a way parents can find out what childcare does exist if they have to go to work. Sue, go ahead.
Sorry, I forgot to put my hand down.
Oh, okay. Any other thoughts, questions, comments around this that you guys can think of? Okay, I don't see any other hands. So I think we are going to gift you all with the gift of a half hour of time, but here is our ask. Our next meeting is our last meeting. So again, June 30th from 5 to 6:30 p.m. Again, public comment can be accepted before that meeting. So if folks are listening, just one more time, reopening ideas at doe.k12.de.us or voicemail at 302-735-4244 for public comment. Thank you, Patches, for the next slide. And when we have our meeting next week, our goal is to go through all of these scenarios. We have talked about scenario 1 in 2 different meetings and feedback, and we've asked you to give us feedback for scenario 2 and 3. So our job is to incorporate this and get this turned over to all of you as soon as possible. And we ask that before our next meeting, you send any comments, concerns in writing so that we can make sure we integrate those into that plan. And at our very last meeting next week, our plan will be to go through all of those and to review and to make sure that we are discussing the things that folks want to make sure is included before handing this off to the Secretary and Governor's office for review. Mike, I'll hand back over to you if there's anything else. Otherwise, I think, again, if folks can get us their comments for next week.
That'd be great. Yeah, then, and within the next 2 to 3 days, we'll be sure to collate all the comments and get that draft to the committee. And if the committee has any feedback, feel free to email Megan or myself, and we'll be sure to incorporate that into that final document. So with that, we're going to conclude the meeting, unless there are any questions. Very good. All right. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Have a good night. Good night.
Take care.
Good night.